Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to Ginger Live. Sammy Albano guest hosting for Ginger Broderick today, and with my very special guest, Bobby Gonzalez. Bobby, welcome to our show. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me, Sammy. I'm honored.
Well, you're honored, and it's an honor for me because absolutely, I've been trying to get you. We finally caught up, and you know, there's a lot going on in New York right now. We got pro basketball starting last week. And we have college basketball starting next week. This weekend, the New York Marathon. And what do you decide to do? Jump town. Tell us why you're leaving New York.
Yes, Sammy, I'm going to do a little teaching and coaching. I'm heading over to Beijing, China. I'm going to be at the Olympic training facility for the national teams in China for about the next 2-3 weeks, and it's going to be pretty exciting. I'm going to basically run a training camp for the 18 and under national teams, and you know, impart some wisdom. And I've been to a lot of places around the globe, but I've never been to China, so this should be an interesting experience.
You had a little experience with this Chinese national team earlier in the summer, correct?
That's right. They came in June, Sammy, to New York. They were here for a tournament. I got to run a practice with them for one day, so I got to know the national team coach a little bit. So this will be my second time seeing him. But it should be really interesting. You know, anytime I get a chance to do something internationally this summer through 5-star, I went to England for 10 days.
So basically it'll be either turkey a la king or turkey chow mein for Thanksgiving this year.
That's right.
But the great thing is you're going to be home just in time for what? For your daughter's birthday.
My daughter's birthday. That's key. My daughter, Brooke, I have to be here for her birthday. I wouldn't want to miss that for the world.
You know, but you've come a long way. You know, when I met you, I always kid you. I say, boy, you were just a kid selling fruit on the corner. You moved here from Binghamton some 30-plus years ago. And, you know, you've really kind of connected in a very New York City type of way, right with the grassroots. You started with the great Riverside Church program, and then you work with 5-Star. Why don't you tell us about your humble beginnings?
Well, that's right, Sammy. You hit it right on the head. It really has become my home now that I've been here more years than I actually lived in Binghamton and upstate. But came to New York, you know, hooked up with Bob Mackey, who's now the women's coach at Christ the King. Started coaching at St. Nicholas of Tallentine. Of course, we had the great, you know, Malik Sealy, Adrian Autry, Brian Reese. We had those great players. So, of course, I got to meet Howard Garfinkel from 5-Star, the late, great Mr. Garf. Started working the camp, and then that led to the Riverside Church thing with Ernie Lorch and Luke Almeida.
And that connection then led to your first college job. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's right. Once I started in the Catholic League and doing the AAU thing and 5-Star and all of that, then all of a sudden Pete Gillen, you know, through Mr. Garfinkel, he got to watch me work, and then Pete Gillen decided to hire me at Xavier University, Cincinnati, Ohio. So I went to Xavier, and then that in turn went to Providence and then University of Virginia. And of course, I came back to my roots and started recruiting New York City players like God Shamgod.
Right. But you know what's really amazing, you know, and we all loved him, the late Howard Garfinkel, one of the great institutions of basketball in New York City. He fired you about 100 times at his camp, and yet he still recommended for your job. Talk about that unique relationship you had with Garf.
Oh, incredible, Sammy. I mean, Garf was one of a kind. Everybody that knows Garf through the years knows that. You know, gave us a training ground where you could, you know, show your coaching ability. Of course, it was there with guys like Rick Pitino, John Calipari, Chuck Daly. All the greats came through the camp, and Garf promoted me there, and he saw my style, pressing and running, and he promoted me for jobs. And it was just an incredible, kind of like a learning lab.
All right. You know, you mentioned Chuck Daly. Talk about how you got fired one day. But, you know, Garf, again, after thinking about it, rescinded the firing. Talk about that day.
That's right. You know, everybody told me stories about it. When Garf fires you now, don't get too carried away with it because, you know, he doesn't mean it. He'll forget 10 minutes later. But I had never been through that. And sure enough, Chuck Daly showed up one day to do a big lecture, and Garf said,
Chuck Daly, the great Olympic coach.
Great
the Dream
Olympic
Team,
coach.
1992.
That's
all right.
right.
I just wanted to get that in there. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And what happened was, you know, he said, when this station ends, don't let the kids go to the water fountain. I want them immediately so I can introduce Chuck Daly. And sure enough, I started getting interviewed for the book they were doing on the camp, talking all about Tallentine being #1 in the country, national champs. And all of a sudden, the whistle blew, and there was about 150 kids in line. And so Garf yelled out, "Gonzo, you are officially fired." And so he fired me right in front of Chuck Daly. 10 minutes later, he brought me up to meet Chuck Daly to tell him what a great young coach I was and a bright future I had, and he already forgot about the fact that he fired me.
That was great. Howard Garfinkel, he passed away this past spring, and he's sorely missed. But, you mentioned Shamgard. You recruited him at Providence. You guys had great success at Providence, got to an Elite Eight game, should have been in the Final Four in 1997. Tell us about what happened from there.
That experience was incredible, Sammy. I helped recruit all those New York City kids. Jamel Thomas, who's Stephon Marbury's cousin, Shamgard, Llewellyn Cole, Ruben Garces, who was from Panama, Corey Wright, another Harlem kid. So all these New York guys, Pete Gillen was a New Yorker, I was a New Yorker. We got to the Elite Eight. We were knocking on the door, as you mentioned, Sammy, to get to a Final Four. And then from there, Dick Vitale and all these guys started singing my praises as a great New York recruiter. Then we went to University of Virginia. We got the #1 recruiting class in the country. We were there in the ACC. And then, of course, Manhattan came calling, a chance to run my own program and be at Manhattan College in Riverdale. And I went there for 7 years as a head coach. And, of course, we had an incredible run.
And, when you look back at it, you really had to rebuild that program from ground zero. And you never complained about it. And within a very short time, you managed to, obviously bring the team to great heights. First time in the school's history that it went back to the NCAA's back-to-back years. And that was really a niche on your belt that made other schools say, hey, this guy's a rising star. But, obviously being at Manhattan College, you guys won the MAC title, as I mentioned. And it started basically your New York City career that, as Ginger has some photos it's going to show, has gone from, Wall Street to the courts of West 4th Street.
That was a special moment. Mayor Giuliani, as you know, was the mayor at the time, was a Manhattan grad. Raymond Kelly, chief of police, former chief commissioner. And those guys were Manhattan grads. And what happened basically was, they invited us down to, come and ring the opening morning bell.
It was great for New York City.
Incredible experience. My mother
was proud. And there's that team. That's the back-to-back team.
That team did something. Coach Lapis, Fran Fischilla, Steve Masiello was there now. Some great coaches, Jack Powers. That team did something that no Manhattan team has ever done, which was...
And Ken Norton. Let's not forget the great Ken Norton, who led them to the NCAAs.
We won back-to-back regular season titles, MAC tournament titles.
We know a little bit about that guy.
Yes, Rick Pitino, one of my mentors, a brilliant coach. I stole a lot of the stuff from him.
Another Howard Garfinkel disciple.
Yes, pressing and running. I took a lot of basketball stuff from him. We were fortunate. Coached against him in the Big East, but he imparted a lot of knowledge, and he was a very brilliant basketball coach that I learned a lot from.
Yeah, he was... And he's still going at 65 years of age. There he is. Looks like, what, you have a Seton Hall tie on there.
That was a Seton Hall game. We had a huge victory. We knocked off Pitt, #8 in the country, Jamie Dixon. Huge win for us, top 10 victory.
Monday night ESPN, if I must.
That's exactly right. And they were, one of the top teams in the country. As you know, Sammy, it was the best league in the nation at the time. One of my dreams came through, becoming a Big East coach in the best league in the country at Louisville, UConn, Jim Calhoun, Syracuse, Jim Boeheim, Hall of Fame coaches, Bob Huggins of West Virginia. The league is different now, not taking anything away from the league. It's still a great league, but nothing like it was at that time.
Yep, and look at you. And here you are, you're playing against one of your mentors.
Yes, Jim Boeheim. I grew up at the camp, working the camp, and Jim Boeheim, Hall of Famer, put me with USA Basketball. That's Jeremy Hazel shooting against NBA player Wesley Johnson. And we played Syracuse in the Garden at the Big East tournament, and that was a fantastic memory. And Jim Boeheim, once again, one of the great ones, still coaching to this day.
He always, every time I run into him, he always goes, how's Bobby doing? And I tell him, Bobby's doing just fine. Bobby...
This is also in the Big East tournament, Sammy, coaching in the Garden. Great experience for a New York guy. As you know, there's nothing like Madison Square Garden, Sammy. The great coaches that have said it through the years.
The Mecca. The Mecca.
Nothing like the Garden.
Coach Carnesecca said it's like being in Macy's window. And here look like you and some of your mentors are getting together there.
Couple legends, as you know. We already talked about Coach Jim Boeheim. Coach Mike Krzyzewski, his assistant Jeff Capel was my roommate when we won a gold medal in Turkey with Coach Jay Wright from Villanova with USA Basketball. Those are the guys that are kind of kings of USA Basketball today. Of course, Coach Krzyzewski, the Olympic coach, Jim Boeheim, who put me with USA Basketball. There's Timmy Higgins, who's a legendary official. And, they put me with a couple Hall of Famers. I'm not quite in that company with those guys, but it's a nice picture nonetheless.
It's tremendous. And there's another one of your mentors.
Coach Carnesecca, as you know, Sammy, me and you have great history together back in the St. John's days. And I was working Coach Carnesecca's camp in upstate New York, Jerry Marabito, Sydney, New York, back with the Catholic League, and Coach Malik Sealy, who was one of the St. John's great players.
I remember sleeping up there. It was 40 degrees at night in July.
Incredible.
not April. In July, it was 40 degrees at night.
Coach Carnesecca always said to me, when you coach in New York, your behind is in Macy's window. I never forgot that line.
And here we are again, still at Seton Hall. You can tell by the blue tie.
Yes, that was another great win for us at Seton Hall when we actually beat Rick Pitino in Louisville. That was one of my, signature wins. And, we had some great wins. When I look back now,
I remember that night, though, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it the night Rick Pitino kind of kept his team in the locker room a little bit past closing time?
He was not happy with him. I was coming out 2, 3 in the morning. He was still there with his team, getting ready to leave. He had him in there watching film. It shows you what a great coach Coach Pitino was and how hard he worked and how much he prepared with his teams. But, Sammy, I look back now, it's nothing but love about my time at Seton Hall. It gave me an opportunity to be a head coach in the Big East. I learned a lot. And I grew a lot as a person. All these experiences help make you who you are as a person and as a coach.
Yep, but there we go. The awards that have come upon you. Everyone knew you were a terrific recruiter. They knew you were the #1 up-and-coming coach. MAC Coach of the Year. Nobody wanted to play Manhattan. They didn't care if it was at home or on the road at Dratty. Nobody wanted to play the Jaspers when you were the coach there.
Well, as
back-to-back coach, 2003 and 2004. That doesn't happen in any conference.
As you know, Sammy, all those awards are nice, and I'm very proud of them and everything like that. And I'm not just saying this to be humble, but you know that we had special players, great teams. You get a guy like Luis Flores, who was the best player in the history of the school at Manhattan College, and you get some of the kids we had at Seton Hall, like a Jeremy Hazel, a Jordan Theodore. Players. Your coaches are only as good as their players, and we had some special players during those years.
Yeah, Seton Hall really kind of raised again. We get some more, a little bit of your resume there. And there's no doubt about it. Seton Hall did get to lofty heights. You might not have gone to an NCAA tournament, but the league was even more competitive when you were there because, as you talked about, the coaches. Let's start right in Connecticut with Jim Calhoun, Hall of Famer. Jim Boeheim, Hall of Famer. Let's start like that. Rick Pitino, now a Hall of Fame. Bob Huggins, who will be a Hall of Famer.
Jay Wright, who's, by the way, just won a national.
Defending National Coach of the Year. That's not bad company to be with. That looks like a baseball card.
I know. That was a little promotional thing that was done when I started doing, Sammy,
You're the last guy that's got to promote yourself, really, because you have a great resume, and it's unfortunate that people don't really take recognition of, some of the great heights that you've reached as a coach. The accolades are far and few in between, but when you've got to the NCAA tournament, you did those 2 years, there was no team better prepared than Manhattan College. Beating Florida, losing to a very good Wake Forest team with Chris Paul, no doubt about what you had done at Manhattan College. You had reached the loftiest heights. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't you beat Maryland?
We did in the NIT with Gary Williams, who's another Hall of Famer, by the way.
So you've kind of got a history. You beat Billy Donovan, guy who's won 2 national championships. You beat Gary Williams, who won a national championship in 2002.
Great coaches.
All Hall of Fame coaches. So these are things that you don't have on a resume, per se, as Coach of the Year. But those are coaches that never really wanted to face you. There's no doubt about it, because they knew that you were a New York City street fighter. And who's that good-looking guy with you?
Well, Sammy, you could talk about what that night was, which is also
that
special.
was one of the great nights. My good friend Don Hazelton and a couple of his friends put together an award dinner for the Thomas Jefferson High School basketball team that won the state title. And the first thing, we were looking for a keynote speaker, and we sat down, and I said Bobby Gonzalez would be excellent. Lawrence Pollard, the coach of Jefferson, who you have a history with, was enthusiastic about it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Lawrence Pollard, again with that crew, with Brian Reese and Adrian Autry and all those kids. I used to drive the Riverside Church van to 5-star camp for 7 years for Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Garfinkel, and all those kids were in the van, and Lawrence was one of them. Terrific player, great guy.
And he's turned out to be a great coach.
Turned out to be a great coach.
But, now comes the other side of the story. You talked about learning a lot at Seton Hall. I think you've learned not only a lot about basketball, but a lot about life. Because now let's look at it. Unfortunately, about March 18, 2010, you got called up into the office. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Well, Sammy, of course, we had 3 straight winning seasons, so we were really turning the corner, and I did get an extension in November. So things were actually heading in the right direction, but unfortunately, we took some kids, and they made some bad choices. And Larry Brown had a great line once. He said to me, we didn't have bad kids. We had kids that, talent is a gift and character is a choice. And we had some kids that just made some bad choices. And I think that contributed greatly to us getting let go at Seton Hall. But Sammy, when I look back now, I've been humbled by the experience. I've learned a lot in these last so many years. in terms of, going through something like that. When you're a successful coach, we had, 8 out of 11 winning seasons, 5 out of 11 postseasons. When you're winning, you don't think you're ever going to get let go or go through something like that because, you feel like you have security. But then all of a sudden, when the rug gets pulled out from under you, you really have to take a hard look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, what could I have done differently? How could I have handled the administration differently? And another line comes to mind with Larry Brown where he said to me, Bobby, in the NBA, the president, the general manager, the owner, and the head coach has to be attached at the hip. Well, in college, it's the president, the athletic director, and the coach. And unfortunately, I was at Seton Hall, and there was a little bit of dysfunction going on with the administration. But at the same time, I have to own the things, Sammy, that I could have done differently and I learned from. And now that I've been out for, a certain amount of years.
You've been out almost 7 years, and, people have done murder and have done, less for their sins than what you've done.
Well,
it's always been my contention. Yeah, great coach, great person. But sometimes I thought maybe you didn't see the whole picture, that there was more to, the way you may have spoken to someone. But at the end of the day, I think that you've owned up that, that there was a certain maturity level that you've now reached looking back. You know that you've done certain things wrong. You deserve a second chance. I'm a big believer in second chances. And it's kind of coincidental you're here right before the presidential election because I think you're a lot like Donald Trump. I think you're a lot misunderstood. There's no doubt about it. And, when you talk about the deplorables, you get some media types out there, guys that have never been on layup lines in their life, guys that have never taken batting practice, guys that have never been in your locker room writing things about you that they're getting from second and third hand sources. And it's really kind of hurt your development and getting another job as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think, Sammy, you make a great point. I think what happened through the years, and some of it, again, I'll have to own, I was an aggressive, young, excitable coach. And I think sometimes I gave the wrong impression, and there was a media perception. And as they said, the great Rolly Massimino had a great line when he said, reputation, if you have a reputation for getting up early in the morning, you could sleep until noon every day and get away with it. And just like they say, the power of the pen, perception, unfortunately, perception is reality. And I think the media took me wrong during my years at Manhattan, and they saw me as a guy that was overzealous, over the top, a little too aggressive. And I think that rubbed some people the wrong way. And then when I was at Seton Hall, I was a New York guy in New Jersey. So I think that, I got a little bit of a misunderstanding and a misperception. But I think since then, I look back and I've developed great relationships with the media now because I've learned they have a job to do, and I've grown, I've matured, I've gotten older. I've done a great job, I think, working on my marriage, being a good father to my daughter, my mother who's 90 years old, going upstate to see my mother. So I think that I've learned a lot as not only a family person, but as a coach that wants to coach maybe someday in the NBA. I've also studied
you mentioned family, but, let's look back at your team. There was never more family than when your team, your kids were always together, and they always backed their coach because the coach always had their back. Obviously, look, because, as Coach Carnesecca once said to me, goes, I'd rather have a bad team and a bad kid, and unfortunately you had 3 or 4. And it did you in. But you backed those kids. You still stood by them like you were their father. And, unfortunately, a lot of people just looked at one side of the story. And, you do have a lot of great friends in the profession. And as you said, Larry Brown, defending national championship coach Jay Wright, who you've done international coaching with, been a peer of his in the Big East. And those guys have tried to help you out. And I just think that there are a lot of ADs out there that are like a lot of misguided voters right now in this election. They're not looking at the big picture, what there is in you, and how you can resurrect the program. And I think that anyone who deserved a second chance, it's you, because, you've worked at a Catholic school, and as Coach Carnesecca said, when you work at a Catholic school, you're working for rosary beads, not for big paychecks. There's no doubt about that. But you know what? It's a labor of love, and I think that some school, they have to give you that opportunity because, you know what? Down the road, that AD and President hire, they're going to look like geniuses. And you know what's going to happen when they look like geniuses? Ka-ching. You know what? People are going to write checks all the time to the administration, to development for that coach.
I appreciate you saying that, Sammy, and pointing that out. It's very, very kind of you and very nice of you to say that. I've certainly learned, and I would definitely do things differently if I went back to the college game. But I also want to point this out, Sammy, and again, this is certainly not an excuse or anything, but I really have focused a lot in the last so many years on the NBA game. I've gone to the NBA Summer League 3 summers in a row. I went with the Knicks, to a Summer League.
And how'd you do that? through another Larry Brown?
Yes, that was a contact there, and you know, I went out
Mike
to Vegas.
Woodson,
Yes,
who did a great job. He had the Knicks in the playoffs a couple of years
I
ago.
spent the summer, you know, I've gone to the NBA Summer League 3 straight years. I was around USA Basketball for a couple of years. I have done a lot of scouting. I've done a lot of consulting. So I've really studied the pro game, and I've also done a lot of international stuff because, you know, part of me, my dream, one of my dreams was to be a head coach in the Big East, and I accomplished that. And one of my other goals now and my other dreams was to someday coach in the NBA. So, you know, a lot of people want me to come back to college, and I have never said I won't. You know, you never say never. But I've also really spent a lot of time thinking about coming to the NBA and coaching in the NBA.
Yeah, but it's kind of funny here. To help make ends meet over the last 5 or 6 years, what have you done? You've joined some of those deplorables and been part of the fourth estate with the media. Talk to us about that.
Well, that's the other thing, Sammy. You know, I had a contract with NBC for a while doing NBC Sports Talk. I've done TV. I've been ESPN Radio with March Madness. I wrote over 30 columns for Chris Sheridan for Sheridan Hoops, and I was a little bit of a writer. And I was able to put my own experiences.
Come on, you had to be a ghostwriter. I saw your transcript at Binghamton.
No question. I had a lot of help with that. It was my content, and I had work, you know, some people helping me. And then, of course, you know, I've done a ton of, speaking engagements and clinics and motivational stuff. And what I've learned, Sammy, is, again, when you take a step back, that's the one thing a lot of college coaches and NBA coaches will tell you the same thing. When you're in it for 18 straight years and you're just working maniacal and all you're thinking about is winning games and the next game and the next recruit and the next this, what happens is, Sammy, you never take a step back and learn how other people do things. And so what this time has been, Sammy, is almost like a sabbatical, is I've learned
Sabbatical, 7 years. Come on.
Well,
it sounds like a retirement.
Well, at the same time, of course, I got married, bought a house, had a daughter, you go through life things and life experiences. But what I was going to say, Sammy, is when you take a step back, you learn there's other ways to do things. You pick up X's and O's. You become a stronger coach, a better coach. So I've actually become a more rounded, not just a better rounded person.
And you've stayed in the neighborhood. There's no doubt about it.
That's right. I've wanted
and
to
one
be
of your
around
good
my
neighbors is a very successful coach, or should I say manager. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Oh, yeah, Joe Girardi from the Yankees. He's a neighbor up where I live. And I knew Joe Torre a little bit, had a house up near where I live.
And Joe Torre, didn't he contact you a couple of times?
Yes, we did some things together because he got recruited one day by Honey Russell, a legendary Seton Hall figure. He knew I was the coach of Seton Hall. So he had a connection from back in the day with Seton Hall. And he knew that I was a neighbor of his. And we did a couple things together. I got to meet Mariano Rivera and a couple of guys. So, Sammy, I stayed in New York. I've been around my wife and daughter. So that's been a positive. And I've been around the New York area. And to this day, when I come, I don't want to act like a celebrity. When I come to Manhattan, I get stopped in the street. What they still remember, people will say there's no place like winning in New York City. And I got to admit, Sammy, it's true. No place like New York. Like Frank Sinatra said, Lou Carnesecca, and all the legends, when you win in New York, they remember you forever. And they don't bring up so much about the winning at Seton Hall or the TV or the radio or even at Providence, Xavier, Providence, Virginia, or even the NBA stuff. They bring up Manhattan. They say, weren't you the coach that was at Manhattan that beat Florida in the NCAA? Because whether it's 10 years ago or 20 years ago, when you win in a city like New York,
yeah, but I do remember one night about 10 years ago, you had just lost to Wake Forest.
Oh, yeah.
And my son Chris and I and a few other friends had just gone to the Eastern Regionals at the Meadowlands, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we were sitting down at an East Side restaurant, Campagnol, one of our favorites. And Frankie D, the maitre d', comes over. He goes, Coach Gonzalez is at the bar. I don't have a table for him. So I guess it hadn't sunk in just then. But, I just want to get back to, you talk about Jay Wright, defending national championship coach, a great friend of both of ours. You've coached with him. What did you learn from him? Because here's a guy who really had to pay his dues in the Big East.
Incredible, Sammy. What a humble guy that's never changed. We were roommates, Sammy, for 30 days in Izmir, Turkey, Jeff Capel and Jay and myself. And we won a gold medal together, of course, with guys like Jerry McNamara from Syracuse and guys like Randy Foye, who played for Jay. But just, what everybody always says about Jay is he's a better person than he is a coach. And a lot of times that's kind of coach speak. People just say it.
That's true. We know it.
Yeah, like they'll say it because it's politically correct or diplomatic or the right thing to say. With Jay Wright, it couldn't be more true. Here's a guy that's won a national title, hasn't changed an inch in the last 6 months or a year, always calls me up, texts me, hey, Bobby, is there anything I can help you with? Treats you like gold. you know, just a loyal guy, a class guy, came to my wedding. He stuck up for me when I went through my thing at Seton Hall. Instead of being, hey, you know, Sammy, we're in one of these competitive businesses where when you have success, there's a lot of jealousy. A lot of coaches don't want to talk nice about each other. When I got let go at Seton Hall, Jay Wright was right there, you know, at my side saying, Bobby Gonzalez, great coach. You know, he deserves another chance. He's a guy that is really true to his word.
There's no doubt about it. And you spent, like you said, 30 days with him internationally. That had to be a great experience to win an international gold medal. And you remember my great line to Jay Wright? I said, Jay, you might have got a gold medal, but you really deserve the Purple Heart to be that guy's roommate for 30 days.
Well, and another great story and a true story because you're involved in this, Sammy. And again, we've talked about how me and you have great history together. But Jay Wright, first phone call he makes, we get back in the bus. I'm sitting with Jeff Capel. We're hugging. Jeff Capel, of course, the associate head coach at Duke right now, #1 in the country right now, preseason. I'm flying down there to see Jeff in December. We're still very close. But first guy, Jay Wright, goes, Bobby, I got to make a phone call. I said, who are you calling, Jay? He goes, I have to call one guy to tell him we won the gold medal, Sammy Albano, and you were at your beach club at the time.
Yeah, it was a Sunday. I'll never forget, we had a Sunday evening, had my good friend Don Hazelton pouring some vino. I was barbecuing, and we took the call, and it was just a great, great feeling to hear because I know you guys were away 30 days. You put together a team. And it wasn't easy living over there for you guys either.
No question, Sammy. As you know, us in Israel, unfortunately, we live in a time where, of course, there is political unrest in places like the Middle East and America and Israel, and some of the places had to really get extra security. And it was just a learning experience, incredible learning experience for all of us. Till this day, myself and Jay, someday I'm going to have to do a book. I can tell my side of the story about Seton Hall and tell the real truth about everything that happened, even though I wish them great success.
Basketball's been very good to you, obviously.
Incredible, Sammy.
Why don't you just give us, we have a couple of minutes left here. Talk to me about basketball and what it really means to you.
Well, Sammy, it's been a love of mine since I was a young kid. I got bit with the basketball bug at an early age. And, I didn't have a father or an uncle or anybody that played in the game or worked in the game.
No, but your father was a boxer.
My father was a fighter, and he taught me that, if you go inside the ring and you look at a basketball court, 94-foot court, like it's a ring, a boxing ring, and you give everything you got, and even when you don't feel like you could go one more round, you're able to climb in and go one more round. You can never go wrong.
As I've said, you always have a little bit of an edge, and I believe you got that from your father because he was a tough guy. You're a street fighter. Your teams, it extended to your teams.
Take on the personality of the coach.
That characteristic went out there when they were on the court. Those 94 feet, baseline to baseline, they had that same edge. So there's no doubt about it that your father really had an influence in that persona that you have out there on the court.
Sammy, I appreciate you pointing that out and bringing that up. My father died when I was 18. Of course, an emotional thing for me. When I look back now, I can't believe, I'm 53 years old.
And that's why some of these coaches have kind of taken his place. Howard Garfinkel and people like that. Larry Brown. He's no spring chicken either.
Sonny Vaccaro was a mentor back in the day. My first Adidas contract, and plenty of, like Jim Boeheim, as I mentioned, growing up in upstate New York. And you're right, Sammy. But I appreciate you mentioning that because they used to say my teams took on the personality of the head coach. And the one thing I cared about more than anything, Sammy, was if we weren't the smartest team or we weren't the best execution team or the best this team or that team, we always wanted to be the toughest team.
You were the
toughest
hardest team. And I got to tell you, this has really been a pleasure. You've been a long-time friend, 30 years. I know when you first came to New York, I gave you a tough time, but I saw that you had a lot of moxie, and I'm really happy that you're here today. I wish you a lot of luck in China.
Yes.
I hope you guys have a safe and happy, healthy trip, and we'll see you sometime in the new year. Bobby, thanks for being here.
Sammy, thank you for having me. It was a great experience, as always, Sammy. Hanging out with you, as always, it doesn't seem like work.
And thanks for tuning in, everyone. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to thank our most gracious host, not here today, Ginger Broderick, for giving me the opportunity, Sammy Albano, to present Bobby Gonzalez and his basketball story today. Have a great weekend, everyone.